In the winter of 1997, Kurt Warner was handed a piece of paper that felt more like an insult than an opportunity. He was 26 years old, a father of two, and a man who had already spent 3 years stocking grocery shelves and playing on a 50-yard carpet in the Arena League. The St. Louis Rams were offering him a contract, but it came with a brutal condition. Leave your family, fly across the Atlantic, and prove yourself in the mud of NFL Europe. Warner didn't have weeks to weigh his options. He had a 24-hour window to decide if he was going to chase a ghost in Amsterdam or finally grow up and accept a real life in Iowa. If he says no, the greatest show on turf never happens. If he stays home, the Rams remain a basement-dwelling franchise, and Kurt Warner is just another guy at the local Hy-Vee with a what-if story. Tonight, we're looking at the most high-stakes 24 hours in NFL history. This isn't the Disney version of the story. If you remember the 1999 Greatest Show on Turf, you know the ending, but you don't know how close we were to never seeing it at all. To understand why that choice was so heavy, and why the world had written him off, we have to go back to where the dream first stalled. We have to go back to 1994. The NFL of the early 90s was the era of the system quarterback. If you didn't go to a major Division I school, if you weren't drafted in the first 3 rounds, you were essentially invisible. Warner was a local kid from the University of Northern Iowa. He didn't even start for the Panthers until his senior year in 1993. When the 1994 NFL draft came and went, 222 names were called. Kurt Warner's was not one of them. However, he got a call from the Green Bay Packers. For a kid from Iowa, this was the dream. But look at who was in that room in 1994. The Packers weren't looking for a savior. They had one. Brett Favre was 24 years old and becoming the face of the league. Behind him was Mark Brunell, who would go on to be a star in Jacksonville, and Ty Detmer, a Heisman Trophy winner. The coaching staff in Green Bay that year was perhaps the greatest collection of offensive minds ever assembled. Mike Holmgren was the head coach. Steve Mariucci was the quarterback's coach. Warner walked into camp, and the coaches gave him a nickname that stayed with him for years: the camp arm. In NFL terminology, a camp arm is a human tackling dummy. You're there to throw the passes the starters don't want to throw so they don't wear out their shoulders. You take no reps with the first team. You barely get a glance from the head coach. The story goes that during one practice, Mariucci asked Warner to get under center. Warner, nervous and lacking the pro-style experience, hesitated. Mariucci famously told him, "Kurt, you gotta be ready." Warner wasn't ready. He was cut 5 weeks into camp. Imagine that drive home from Green Bay to Cedar Falls. You've seen Brett Favre throw. You've seen what a real NFL quarterback looks like. And you've been told, in no uncertain terms, that you aren't one of them. At 23 years old, Kurt Warner's NFL career was over before he ever completed a pass. This is the part of the story that resonates with every working man fan. From 1994 to late 1995, Kurt Warner was a ghost in the football world. He returned to his hometown and took a job at the Hy-Vee supermarket on University Avenue. He worked the night shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m., while the rest of the world was sleeping, and while
I would go in about 10:30 at night and work until about 5:30 in the morning, come home, sleep for a couple hours, watch the kids all day long.
Brett Favre was leading the Packers to the 1995 NFC Championship game, Warner was stocking boxes of cereal and facing jars of peanut butter for $5.50 an hour. This wasn't a movie montage. This was a year and a half of silence. Warner would leave the grocery store at sunrise, go to the Unidome, and throw passes to anyone who would catch them. His wife, Brenda, would wait in the car with their kids while he worked on his footwork in the dark. He sent tapes to every NFL team. He sent tapes to Canadian Football League teams. The response was always the same: no. Finally, the Iowa Barnstormers of the Arena Football League called. To a traditionalist, arena ball was a circus. It was played on a 50-yard carpet with padded walls. It was high-scoring, gimmick-heavy, paid almost nothing. But Warner needed the money. From 1995 to 1997, Warner became the king of the AFL. He threw for over 10,000 yards. He led the Barnstormers to back-to-back Arena Bowls in 96 and 97. Older fans might remember those games on ESPN2, the bright jerseys, the fast pace. Warner was great, but the NFL still viewed him as an arena guy. In the scouting world of the 90s, that was a stigma you couldn't wash off. You were seen as a guy who couldn't read a full-field defense because the arena field was so narrow and lacked a traditional pass rush. In December 1997, the St. Louis Rams were a mess. They had finished 5-11. Their head coach, Dick Vermeil, was under fire. Their scouts were looking for any warm body to compete for a roster spot. They saw Warner's arena tapes and offered him a future contract. But there was a catch that almost ended the story. This was the moment we talked about, the 24-hour window where his entire future hung in the balance. The Rams didn't want him in St. Louis. They wanted to allocate him to NFL Europe. They wanted him to go to the Amsterdam Admirals. For Warner, this was a moment of profound doubt. He was 26. He had a family. He was finally an NFL player on paper, but now they wanted to ship him across the ocean to a developmental league. If he failed in Amsterdam, he was done. If he stayed in the U.S. and played arena ball, he was at least a star. Warner and Brenda sat at their kitchen table. This was the call. This was the moment of yes or no. Many players in his position, tired of being shuffled around, would have said no. They would have stayed in Iowa, played 5 more years of arena ball, and retired as a local legend. But Warner got on the plane. The 1998 Amsterdam Admirals season is the lost chapter of Kurt Warner's career. He played in the mud of Europe against guys fighting for their lives. His backup? A young kid from Louisiana named Jake Delhomme. Warner led the league in 2,101 passing yards and 15 touchdowns. He proved he could play 11-man football in the elements. When he returned to St. Louis for the 1998 season, he was the 3rd stringer. He sat behind Tony Banks and Steve Bono. He played in only 1 game that year, a meaningless Week 17 matchup against the 49ers. He went 4 for 11 for 39 yards. Heading into the 1999 preseason, the Rams didn't think he was a starter. They went out and spent $17 million on Trent Green. Warner was just a backup. Guy with a cool story, but no future. August 28th, 1999, the Trans World Dome, a preseason game against the San Diego Chargers. Trent Green drops back to pass. A young, aggressive safety named Rodney Harrison comes on a blitz. He hits Green low. Green's ACL shreds. The stadium goes silent. The Rams' $17 million season was over before it started. Dick Vermeil, a man who wore his heart on his sleeve, went to the podium for the post-game press conference. He looked into the cameras and said,
"We will rally around Kurt Warner, and we'll play good football."
The fans in St. Louis groaned. The national media laughed. The grocery guy? The arena guy? The Rams were immediately dismissed. Week 1, September 12th, 1999. Versus Baltimore. Warner doesn't just play, he lights up the Ravens for 309 yards and 3 touchdowns. Week 4, October 10th, 1999, versus San Francisco. The 49ers were the kings of the NFC West. They had beaten the Rams 17 straight times. The Rams hadn't beaten the Niners since 1990. Warner walked into the dome and threw 5 touchdown passes. 4 of them went to Isaac Bruce. The score was 42-20. That was the day the league realized this wasn't a fluke. Mike Martz, the offensive coordinator, had found the perfect trigger man for his Air Coryell system. With Marshall Faulk in the backfield and the marksman Isaac Bruce out wide, the greatest show on turf was officially born. Warner finished 1999 with 4,353 yards and 41 touchdowns. He was only the 2nd player in history to throw 40-plus touchdowns in a season. The first was Dan Marino in 84-86. He won the NFL MVP. The 1999 playoffs were a gauntlet. The Rams survived a 49-37 shootout with the Vikings. Then they faced the brutal defense of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the NFC Championship. Warner won that game 11-6. proving he could win a Mud Bowl defensive struggle. Super Bowl 34, January 30th, 2000, the Rams versus the Tennessee Titans. Warner was legendary. He threw for 414 yards, breaking Joe Montana's Super Bowl record, but the Titans wouldn't go away. Steve McNair led a furious comeback to tie the game at 16-16. With 2 minutes left, Warner dropped back and launched a bomb to Isaac Bruce. 73 yards. Touchdown. But even then, it wasn't over. McNair drove the Titans to the 1-yard line. We all remember the final play, the tackle. Mike Jones stopping Kevin Dyson inches from the goal line as time expired. The images of Warner falling to his knees covered in confetti are etched in our minds. But for those of us who remember him in '94 or his 1998 season in Amsterdam, that moment wasn't about a fairy tale. It was about the fact that he was right all along. He was an NFL quarterback. He just needed the league to catch up to him. Kurt Warner went on to win another MVP in 2001. He led the Rams back to the Super Bowl in 2001. He would later defy the odds again, leading the Arizona Cardinals to their first ever Super Bowl in 2008. But when we look back at the history of the NFL from the leather helmets of the 50s to the modern era, there is no story like Kurt Warner's. It tells us that the experts don't always know. The scouts missed him. The Packers missed him. The Rams almost missed him. If he hadn't taken that 24-hour call in 1998, if he hadn't gotten on that plane to Amsterdam, the history of the NFL would look completely different. There would be no greatest show on turf. St. Louis might never have won a title. Marshall Faulk might not be a first-ballot Hall of Famer. Kurt Warner didn't just save his own career, he saved a franchise. And he did it by stocking shelves at 3 a.m., by playing in the Arena League when everyone told him it was a joke, and by having the courage to say yes one last time. Thank you for watching this deep dive into one of the greatest eras of the game. If you remember that '99 season, if you remember the roar of the Transworld Dome, share your favorite memory in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe to NFL Uncovered as we continue to tell the real, unvarnished stories of the legends who built this league. We'll see you on the next one.